Introduce yourself.
I'm Chris. That's Christy.
We'll let her comment. So I'm Christy. I want to start off by saying in my family, we like to get together and tell each other stories. And when we do that, we call it porch sitting. That doesn't mean that we're sitting on a porch all the time. Sometimes we're around the kitchen table, sometimes we're in the backyard around the fire. Regardless of where we are, we're porch sitting. So we hope that you will enjoy porch sitting with us tonight as we just tell you some of the stories that we've collected about Montgomery County. So we are going to talk about legends, lore, and hauntings. So not everything is necessarily scary. The first thing we're going to talk about are fairy circles. Have any of you guys seen these around town?
Oh yeah.
Yes.
They're very prevalent. Chris is going to talk.
Well, it's an interesting phenomenon that you do see in certain areas that you don't see in other areas of the world. We were actually just talking to someone about this on a podcast the other day who'd never seen a fairy circle before, had no idea what they were. And the interesting thing about them, when they formed, this one actually was out in North Montgomery, so I took a picture of it, is the grass inside is always a different color than the grass outside the circle, which is part of what makes it a fairy circle. Not to mention the mushrooms that can grow around it, and they grow around most of them. You do have, though, some in certain areas of the world where there'll be little flowers that grow and not mushrooms. So you do have a couple different types of fairy circles out there. And has anybody ever heard of the legend of the fairy circle? You step across it, you could fall asleep and never wake up again, or be transported to the fairy realm. And it's a very big phenomenon that for many years in certain parts of the world, people were terrified when they would find these circles. And one of the interesting things that I find about where you find fairy circles in our town, a lot of times in the areas where people see them prevalently, we have stories of fairy sightings in Crawfordsville, or Montgomery County. And people talk about seeing the will-o-wisps out by the trestles, especially the New Market trestle, and the trestle out by the Boys and Girls Club.
So will-o-wisps, if you do not know what they are little fairy creatures, and they're usually spotted as being, are also called fairy lights. And so people will follow the fairy lights and they will usually take you somewhere. Sometimes something good happens, sometimes something bad is supposed to happen. It depends on who's telling the legend. The biggest thing with the fairy circles is that it is supposed to be a portal into the fairy realm. So stepping inside one, you cross your fingers that you can step back out and that you don't end up displaced out of time. There have been legends, especially in Ireland, of people stepping into fairy circles, and when they step back out, 20 years have passed. And all of their family and friends have moved on and forgotten them and thought that they were long lost, and they haven't aged at all. I personally have never met somebody who stepped into a fairy circle, and I don't want to tempt fate. But we do see these all over Montgomery County, and another distinguishing fact about them is they're usually kind of perfect circles, which is an odd shape to just miraculously pop up.
Are those mushrooms?
Yes.
Those ones are mushrooms, yeah. And actually, when we took this photo, and he said this was out on the North Montgomery school grounds, there was easily 20 to 30 of them all over the school grounds.
Yeah, it was very interesting just to see all the little circles in the grass of all the mushrooms and the difference in the color of the grass. It was very fascinating, as well as we recently, before we saw the fairy circles had received a story about a fairy creature called a troll or a trow in the area that was haunting a couple's house. What a trow is it's a subsect of a troll in fairy lore that likes to take the shape of either an elderly person or a child. In this specific case, they believed it was taking the image of their child, and whenever their child wouldn't be at home, they would still see the child running around the house.
The lore with the trow states that the reason why they choose children or elderly individuals to take the shape of is because they're just looking for love. So they'll come into a house, they want to be hugged, they want to be loved and appreciated, and then they'll go on back outside once they've had their fill of that. It's not an evil entity or anything like that, but their actual shape their true form is like a very kind of smushed down gray being with dark eyes, so they do look very scary, which is why they're just looking to be loved. And the story that we heard this from, the family does live out by North Montgomery in that area. So we found it very exciting for us that they had this story of a fairy and their property right next to where we found fairy circles. The next story that we want to tell you about is William Doyle's Monster. Has anybody, if you've not read the book, have you heard about this story? So this was very exciting. William Doyle was digging a well out on his lawn, or out in his yard. Where
He
was
was
this
on
at?
someone else's property, in the Bainbridge area. He was down at Bainbridge, and he was digging a well there. And as he was digging a well, the ground underneath him gave way, and he fell down to a cavern. And when he fell down to a cavern, there was a creature there that he couldn't readily identify, but was coming at him. And so he took a pickaxe that he had with him as he fell down with, and he killed it. He pinned it to the wall, and then he proceeded to walk around, look around in the grotto where he was, and there was a little water and things like that. It was kind of like a place out of time. But the interesting thing about it is the creature was studied by Wabash College, and the gentleman at Wabash believed it was a subsect to a dinosaur.
He even had a name for it. I'm not even going to begin to pronounce it, but we have tried to research the name of this dinosaur that he told the papers that he believed it was a family of. I can't find anything on this dinosaur. I don't know what it was supposed to be. But we do know that no one in town knew what it was. The Wabash professor did not know what it was, but the town was so excited about this mysterious creature that they displayed it in the shoe store.
Yes.
They displayed it in the shoe store for several days so people can come and look at it. As one does when you find a monster, you think, shoe shop.
Yeah, it's very interesting because he described it as having almost like a alligator body and a swan head. So it was very strange, the description of it that we found. So also in this area, we have a dozen different stories of the Thunderbird. If you're not familiar with the Thunderbird, it's a very large bird. Some believe that the Thunderbird could be a giant condor that is seen in different parts of the country where the giant condors don't exist. But the Indians, the Native Americans, really talked about the Thunderbirds, and you see a lot of Thunderbirds on their totems. Well, Crawfordsville has many sightings of Thunderbirds throughout history. And down in the Spooky Hollow area of the county, we have sightings of where it is trying to attack children and attack people as it is flown out throughout the area for well over 150 years. It's been seen regularly in that area. And even going all the way up to behind the North Donleys, that little area behind there, we've had sightings of the Thunderbird quite regularly. And the wingspan is believed to be as big as a small plane. It's a huge bird. And it gets its name because when it would flap its wings, it sounded like thunder. It was so loud.
So a couple of the stories that we have been approached with that we've collected from different people are, we know that there was a lady who was riding horses down in the Spooky Hollow area of Crawfordsville. And she said her horse got spooked and she had to get off the horse, pull the horse down kind of beside the river, and hide as this creature flew back past them several times. She's very well acquainted with animals, and she told me it was like no bird she had ever seen before. And it was not the only time she saw it several times while riding her horse down in that area. We had another family who, a couple of their young boys said that they were chased down the Spooky Hollow Hill by the Thunderbird, and they refused to go back to that area, like they were that terrified. And then we also know that some Wabash College employees think that they saw it fly over one of the trucks when they were outside, that the shadow of it dwarfed the truck that they were sitting in. It was almost like the sun went away for a moment as it flew over them.
I'm not from this area, so I'm not familiar with where Sleeping Hollow, where these
Spooky
places
Hollow.
you're talking about.
It's down around where Camp Rotary is here in town.
Oh, okay.
Camp Rotary?
And Off-Field Monument.
It's exactly where the founding of the county was. Where the very first settlers in Montgomery County lived, his house, Off-Field, is where Spooky Hollow Bridge is, and where what I like to call the Haunted Valley, is we have lots of stories about that valley. Witch doctors lived there. It was a place where a lot of people believed there were ceremonies where they worshiped the devil, and paganism and things like that were done in that area quite regularly. All the way, and we have people who talk about going out there and doing seances and things like that all the way up to the early 1900s. The Elston girls would go out there to visit the area, as well as go to the Hibernian Mill, which is very close to that area, and to visit the local ghosts there. So it's a very prominent area back in the early turn of between, I would say, 1820 to the early 1900s in Crawfordsville.
Isn't there a nature preserve out right near there? Okay.
About 20 years ago, it was a lot scarier than it is now. There used to be a real old iron bridge there, and there wasn't as many housing areas out there, and it was a lot scarier.
When there was a metal bridge there, you could almost always find a rope hanging from the bridge, because we do have an article where a gentleman hung himself on the bridge, and he died there. And then after that, we don't know how the rope kept appearing, but you could go out there any day of the week and you would find a rope hanging off that bridge.
Well, that's not exactly true. I talked to my parents about this, and one or both of my parents might have been up to some mischief as teenagers, and they may have told me that they and their friends several times went and put the rope out. So it was somebody was doing it, and the stories just kept going on and on about people seeing the spirit of this gentleman out there hanging from the bridge. And of course, some teenagers were making sure they were going to perpetuate that story and keep it going.
Yeah, there's an entire legend that if you drive on the bridge, you shut off your car and blink your lights 3 times, and turn your car back on and try to go, your car won't start.
That is a common urban legend across the United States, and a lot of those common urban legends that you hear in other towns, we all hear about the Spooky Hollow area. That is where our urban legends are born, in that area for this. I will tell you kind of an additional side note story. Off-Field Monument is out there, which is the cornerstone of the house of William Off-Field, who founded the county. Growing up, my parents would always take us out there to see the Off-Field Monument, and my dad would tell us, he'd stop on the road beside it and say we could get out, we could walk up to the monument, and we'd say, Mr. Off-Field, what's going on? And he would say nothing. And I will tell you today, he will still say nothing. Go out there and do it. So, one of my favorite people that we researched while we were looking into all of this stuff, the history of Montgomery County, is Fisher Doherty. And we have many stories that he takes part in and makes cameos in, is a member of. So we're going to tell you a little bit about him tonight. Fisher Doherty, I know he was part of the Underground Railroad here in town. He was very split down the middle with the citizens of Montgomery County. A lot of people loved him to the point where they wanted him to run for governor, and then some people just really hated him and thought he was a horrible person. But he was very political. He had very outrageous opinions, according to some people, which are very more aligned with what our opinions are today. Everybody has equal rights. Everybody should be able to speak for themselves. He was known to go to the courthouse, encourage other people to speak out for themselves, but he also went to the courthouse and encouraged people to learn about spiritualism in Montgomery County. He believed in mediumship, he believed in spirits and ghost photography, and he would preach it from the courthouse steps himself. He thought he was a medium, he thought he himself could take spirit photographs, and he would actually encourage people who were having problems with ghosts to come to him, and that he would go to their houses and exorcise the spirits from their house. So people would write into the newspapers and say that they, their husband or wife had passed away a few months ago, but their spirit won't leave the house, they're causing problems, they can't move on. Fisher Doherty would come and fix those issues for them. He loved spiritualism so much, he decided to create a museum to it, which he called Spiritual Hall. In this museum, he had photographs of different mediums, famous mediums from around the United States. He would invite those mediums to come to his house and hold seances in his house, which was over on Pike Street. He had books that were dedicated to anything paranormal, anything ghosts. He had objects that were thought to be haunted in this museum. And it was a thing you could do in the evenings. You could go to the museum and peruse Spiritual Hall. And now you might be wondering, where was Spiritual Hall? Well, it was on the second floor of a grocery store that stood right here on this property. So the reference area local history of the library is where Spiritual Hall was. So it was always meant to be a place of learning. It was always meant to be a place where things were collected and found. So when you're up there during your after hours and things are getting a little bit spooky, just know it's been there a really long time. It was there before we were here.
What was, time period did he live?
It was a...
He was born in the late 1830s, and he died in 1898.
Yeah, so it was late 1800s.
And his descendants are still around. I've met them, and they love to talk about Fisher.
He
They're
was
not
died.
introduce us because we have attempted to figure out who that was. We haven't.
I gotcha.
Yeah. So the last story I want to tell you about Fisher was one of his attempts at exorcising a ghost from a house. So what he would do was he would get a local child to go with him, and he would go in the house and he would put the spirit that was haunting the house in the child. Then he would take the child out and release the spirit from the child away from the house. And that's how he would exorcise ghosts from houses. However, one time it went really, really wrong, and the child was really ill and sick, and the spirit was not leaving the child. He didn't know what to do. He tried everything he could think of, and finally he needed to go down to the Spooky Hollow area and speak to a local witch doctor that was down there. This witch doctor did not like Fisher Doherty. The situation with this child was not something he was happy about, but he decided he would help this child out, and he made a concoction for the child to drink that was going to help him. And he did so by boiling human urine and having the child drink it. And I don't know about you, but I'd rather live with a ghost in my body for the rest of my life than drink that concoction. But it works. Chris likes to remind me that there is the tale of the Philosopher's Stone, which was made popular with the Harry Potter stories. But the Philosopher's Stone, the Alchemist's Stone of legend, was made with human urine, and it was supposed to prolong people's lives. Still not going to drink urine, still isn't going to happen. I will die a natural death. However, this witch doctor, after this was over, was so infuriated with Fisher Doherty, he made a public statement to the newspapers and said, "Hell resides 15 miles from Crawfordsville, and Fisher Doherty is the devil himself." Ironically, Shade State Park has a legend that the devil was buried in Shade State Park, so maybe hell is 15 miles from Crawfordsville, but that's a different story we're not going to talk about tonight.
So the old hospital, if anybody who's been around is here for very long, has probably heard about the old hospital and how most of the town will tell you they've had an experience there or known someone who's had an experience in the old hospital. A lot of the residents, and it has been a apartment complex multiple times throughout the years after it quit being a hospital and a sanitarium. It has lots of stories from the residents there. The morgue still existed up until the very last renovation, and so you could still go downstairs to the basement and visit the morgue. Obviously there was no bodies there, but still it was probably a pretty creepy place to go. We have lots of stories from people about objects in this place just moving around on their own, people being seen and then disappearing as they walk around the hallways in the buildings. There's a woman in white who has been seen up on the upper floors and up on the roof as people go across around the area. And the people who live in the area a lot of times talk about different sightings of her from their houses, where they can just look out the windows of their house and see her moving around on the roof of the building. And we do have, the building did have a lot of deaths over the years that it was a hospital and a sanitarium. And so it's not far-fetched to believe there may be some residual energies about the place. There has been several investigative groups who have gone into the old hospital before it was rebuilt this last time. And they have had some very interesting EVPs about things that they found in the building, of a woman's voice reaching out to speak to them, as well as screaming and things like that. There are people who said that they've been grabbed and scratched as they walked around the building before the renovations. It's a pretty interesting place for, I think, a lot of history from this area.
Okay, again, where is this located?
So off of East Market.
Yeah, no, you're fine. If you go down Market Street, I think it's Franklin Street that's in front of it. But there's some one-ways there, so you kind of have to go
When
around
you go
about
down
way to
the
get
tracks
to it.
on East Market there, and you see the gas station on your right, you look to your left, you can see the
Oh,
giant building
that's
back
that
there.
building,
Yes.
okay, it's an apartment complex now.
Yes.
Yeah, now.
Right.
And it's been an apartment complex at least twice since it stopped being a hospital.
Yeah, okay, I always wondered what that building was.
Yeah, it was the hospital in Crawfordsville for a very long time, and then it became a hospital / sanatorium for quite a while. And then it closed in the early 80s. I believe 83 was the year it closed. It started to close.
Yeah, I was born in '83 and I was not in this hospital. I went into NB. So.
Yeah, because there was like part of the had closed, like they were no longer doing babies here, but they were other parts that were still. But I think only like 86 or 87 were fully closed.
It looks like they've renovated it, it looks very nice.
It's very nice.
Yeah.
And it's interesting because as there, a lot of the talk around for those who've been here for a long time, there's a lot of tunnels underneath Crawfordsville for different purposes. One was Underground Railroad, another one for other purposes. But there are tunnels that go from the hospital to downtown and then over to the north end. And those tunnels are still there. You can actually get into those tunnels from the hospital.
Really?
They've not closed them off, but it is highly illegal.
You could potentially get into them. We do not encourage anybody to do that or try. There have been some collapses in the tunnels. It's not safe. Don't do it.
Oh, yeah.
Stories before it closed said that when it rained, the elevator, it was like a rain shower in the elevator.
Yeah.
So the tunnels that are under Lincoln, was that for the access?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think everything's kind of connected together.
Because you can still access the house there. So,
Yeah, and the church on the north end still has an access as well, down to the tunnels.
And there's even stones under Wabash, so.
it has a tree in it.
Where the church was?
No, where the tunnel came up, kids were playing in it, so they,
Oh,
to seal it off,
Yeah,
they put a tree.
right.
So it's called a tunnel tree.
Oh, good.
Good name.
So the old jail, for anyone who's not been in it, is the very first rotary jail ever built. It is the only one that still operates. And it is completely quiet almost, even to this day, when it operates. And so when they would take the drunks, which were most of the people who were in the place, and they would go in it, it'd be really hot because it's all metal. And so they would go up next to the bars there. And sometimes as they were sleeping on the floor, their arms, those things would go through the bars, and when they would spit it, it would injure them, cut off arms, legs, hands, things like that. And there were several deaths at the place, as well as 3 hangings that we know of. John Coffey was one of the most famous hangings that happened there. He was hung 3 times before they were finally able to put him to death for a crime that he didn't commit. But his spirit after his hanging has been known to haunt the jail ever since, as well as that part of Crawfordsville. We have a lot of stories about where he would get in people's wagons and ride with them and talk to them while they were going through town, and all the way to Elmdale. He also would get on the local train and travel to Lafayette, and they would see him, and he was a well-known figure in the area. And they talk about how he's still to this day, the jail will tell you, people see him regularly, they hear his voice. And he's kind of a presence that's always at the jail. Unfortunately, there are some other presences at the jail that are a little scarier. They do have some stories of who they believe to be John Henning, one of the other gentlemen who was hung at the jail. And he terrified the prisoners while after his death. If he would visit the jail in the afterlife, they said he would literally terrify everyone with his way he would wail and just the energy he would give off. But if you ever get a chance, they do different types of tours there. It's a great place to visit and check out. They've got some amazing history on the place. And it's very interesting in the way it works.
And we've heard some of the stuff that they've been able to capture on film there. I don't know if they show it or not, but I highly suggest going there and talking to them about the footage and stuff that they have if you're interested in this, because some of it is pretty terrifying.
I know this is kind of off the subject, but wasn't the black guy in Green Mile named John Coffey?
So
We have an interesting story about that.
That's funny. Buckle up. Let's do some porch sitting. The next things that I'm going to say are not endorsed by the library or the Genealogy Club or necessarily Christopher and myself. However, it is a fun thing that we like to talk about. So, John Coffey, our John Coffey, he was not the smartest of men. He was very gullible and easily persuaded to do things by other people, not necessarily nice people. He was accused of murder. We know that he did not commit those murders. It is pretty sure, people around town are pretty sure they know who did it, and it was not him. People liked him. He was generally a nice person. Sometimes he'd get a little too far into his cups, but he was a good person to be around. And he was accused of this murder. He was hung for it. It did not go well. They had to do it several times. If you have seen Stephen King's The Green Mile, his John Coffey, spelled exactly the same way, has a very similar backstory. He is not the smartest of men. He's very gullible. He's accused of a murder he did not commit. It did not go well the first time, and they did it again in it. And so there was some struggles with his execution as well, even though he was given the electric chair, not hung. Stephen King was asked at one point if his John Coffey was based off our John Coffey, and he said no, he had never even heard this story, nor heard of Crawfordsville. Stephen King wrote a book called The Shining a few years before he wrote The Green Mile. In it, he talks about Will Hayes and the Hayes Code. Stephen King is a very good writer and researcher, and if he was researching Will Hayes, I have no doubt that Crawfordsville came up. And if Crawfordsville came up, I have no doubt that the most famous story from Crawfordsville, John Coffey, came up during that research. I'm not saying he did it on purpose. I'm saying he might have fleetingly seen it, it'd been in his mind, and he didn't know why it was there. That is my unofficial claim of John Coffey and Stephen King.
So that's, and let me just do a little time out. That kind of reminds me of a story from Texas where I came from. There was a young lady who was found dead in her car. She lived in Vidor, Texas, and she was found dead. They all thought that her ex-husband had done it, but he supposedly had alibis and whatnot. And her father had put up signs, you know, that accused the police department of corruption, you know, and the guy getting off and all this stuff. And he had, you know, these signs all in Vidor. And the movie that, I think it was called Three Signposts or something like that. I don't remember the name of it. It was Frances McDormand. She was the mother who had lost her daughter the same type of way, and supposedly the guy that wrote the script for the movie hadn't even heard of Vidor, Texas. You know, but I mean, it was just the exact same scenario.
There is an author, his name is Robert Rankin, and he says the best thing that an author can ever do is whatever genre that you write in, that you never read that. And so, because you will inadvertently put things that you have read over the years that you've forgotten, that's tucked away in your mind, and you don't mean to do it, but it happens. So if you're going to write any type of fiction or mystery, you know, anything like that, don't read what you want to write, because you will inadvertently steal other things. So Wabash College has so many stories. So it was hard to kind of narrow down the ones that we wanted to talk about the most. But we did it down to about 5. So right here in 1884, the mall area of Wabash College, which is the big center grass area that goes around the middle of where all the buildings are, they claimed that in the middle of the night they would hear these thunderous howls that seemed to come from everywhere all at once. They couldn't explain it. It would happen around midnight every night, and they just had no idea what was happening there or why they were hearing these noises. That's kind of a little short story, but it's interesting. I have been on Wabash College campus many times over the years. I used to live right next to it. I don't recall ever hearing noises like that, but he's been there in the wee hours of the night as he works at the campus.
Yes, and we do have people who have reported hearing weird noises on the mall. People yelling, loud calls, things like that, with no one be around at all. Because at about 1 in the morning, that campus is dead. There's no one to be seen that's not staff.
My favorite story that I came across when researching Wabash College and looking into these stories, it can be a little gruesome, but it's these ghost cats. And so the science department was dissecting cats, and they were not being humane. They would do what they needed to do, and then they would toss the corpses of the cat out the window into the trash can. And this went on for some time until the boys started telling the professors that they were all being haunted by ghost cats. And the cats kept showing up, and it was really bothering them, and they needed to do something about it. So they changed the way they were doing things and humanely disposed of the bodies after they were done with their research, and the ghost cats stopped haunting the boys. But I believe that if you're going to choose to do something inhumanely, you all deserve to be haunted by ghost cats. And I hope that happens to anybody who does so in the future.
So the library on campus is one of, I would probably say, 3 buildings that will terrify most people who have had to work there at 2 or 3 in the morning completely alone, with no one else there at night. the basement of that building, I've never worked with anyone who doesn't have a story about it. And almost everyone will tell you that something there moves around, watches you, throws books at people. They talk about a black mass that likes to float around the area, as well as there's some shelves there that open and close that you can, with a crank, you can open and close them, that will move on their own, and they like to try to catch you in between them when you're trying to sweep the area in between the area. Personally, on the third floor, I will never again go on that floor alone. There's something about that floor that as soon as you walk on it, you don't feel like you're alone. And it's bad enough that all the paintings like to watch you. But there's just something about that floor, and I cleaned that floor for a year, and you couldn't get me, no matter how much money, get me to go back and go on that floor alone at night. I just can't do it. There's something about that floor that's just terrifying. And then the chapel, we have a lot of stories from people who've been up on the second floor of the chapel who've almost been pushed over the railing. Something likes to give them a good shove and yell and scream in their ear to get out. And when you're in the building, you can almost always see something in the corner of your eye, like a human figure up on the second floor of that building. And it's an open area, because it's this big balcony area, and there's only about 3 people that work there in the custodial staff who will clean it. And most people will no longer go up there because they've had some bad experience where they felt like they were gonna get hurt up on this area. Did I? Oh, yeah, clear. Okay, so Landakai is is a historic building on campus. It sits beside the soccer field, and it is a beautiful building. They just did a ton of work to this building renovating, and it's gorgeous inside. But there is this plaque underneath the stairwell that talks about Claire Crawford, and the boys. I've never met a boy that lived there who will talk about this plaque without talking about that they have seen her walk around the building. They see her, especially on rainy nights or thunderstorms, walking around the building. The boys have been known to be that she's pretty respectful. She doesn't give them too much of a hard time unless they're being disrespectful. Then they say that she can get kind of scary. But it's an interesting thing that they put the piece of the railing back in the building because they first took it out, the entire railing out of the building. They said she became very angry. The management of the college said that the boys couldn't even stay in the building, it was so bad. And so, but when they put the plaque in there, she quieted down. And it's been kind of quiet ever since. They've not had a lot of issues out of her, even though they still see her regularly in the building. But it is a very interesting plaque. It is right underneath the stairwell when you walk in to the building, and the boys are very proud of it.
What does the plaque say? I can't read it.
I can't read it either.
Yeah, I can't read it this way.
It says, "The ghost of Clara Crawford wanders this house in search of a familiar sight. This portion of the original banister may serve to put her at ease on a dark and stormy night. Her hand might be seen holding this banister as she did on the eve of her death."
How did she die?
I can't find one story on exactly how she died, other than the fact that she died on the stairs with her hand around the banister, and it was and that night it had been storming. I can't find anything else in the newspapers about it.
When?
Oh, it was. I can't remember the exact date, to be honest with you, off the top of my head. It's somewhere in a giant file cabinet full of stories.
So, Backstep Brewery was once the Monon Hotel, and when it was built to be the top of the line hotel. It had a person from Chicago come down to furnish it, and it had first elevator?
One of the first
elevators here in town. And it was going to be this magnificent place. And on its opening day, there were actually hundreds of people who came to see the inside of the hotel and experience it. Over the years, as places do, especially hotels, there have been many deaths inside. Some of them were suicides. The upper floors currently are condemned. They're working on remodeling them, but you can't really be up there. However, as they were remodeling them, they found bullet holes in several of the walls in the rooms. We're not saying there's any correlation to this, but John Dillinger did stay in the hotel a few times. Over here in this picture, you will see the bar and the Wheel of Fortune there. The bar owner tells us that this Wheel of Fortune, which is kind of heavy, we played with it a little bit, that it'll just sit and spin on its own sometimes. The dinner bell will ring by itself. They'll be down in the bar and they'll hear people walking around upstairs, even though there's nobody up there. The owner did take some people up there when they were working on it and fixing it, and the women who went up there felt like they were being pinched and pushed. They were told very loudly that they are being too loud. However, they used explicatives when that said it. I'm not going to say what they said, but apparently they needed them to quiet down. But if you've ever been in a hotel and the neighbors are being loud, you do want them to quiet down. Down in the brewery area, a lot of people have said that they don't feel alone, even when they're supposed to be alone in there. And there's just a lot of unease with some of the employees at times when nobody else is around. So that concludes our porch sitting. The next thing says, if you want to come see us, again, we do historical ghost walks downtown every other Saturday, where we talk about specific buildings. We talk about stuff that we have written about in the book. We talk about things that we have not written about in the book, as more people come and tell us more stories and we learn more things about downtown Crawfordsville. On the 5th of October, we are going to be doing a talk and investigation for beginners at the Carnegie Museum. So if you want to know about any sort of ghost hunting equipment, we will bring all of our stuff. You can play with it and mess around with it, see what it's all about, and we'll explain how they're supposed to be used. And then afterwards, the museum will host an investigation.
Yeah, we have found some interesting things with our last investigation at the museum.
The last time we were there, there was an exhibit that had a bunch of uniforms from various wars here in town, and we were playing with a Frank's box, which we don't necessarily think is a real device, but it goes through very quickly radio stations, and so it's like every 0.3 seconds it changes, and the theory is that you are not going to get a whole word out of it. I think that you can get whole words out of it, but we were just playing with it, testing it out, seeing how it worked. And while we were down there, the words that it was spouting out were war and hurt and fire and guns while we were in that display, which was interesting.
We got some interesting energy readings in the building, which is, they have a meter that specifically reads energy. And there were some areas that was going off that there's no electrical around, so there's no way for it to go off on its own. So that was very interesting.
And the staff has told us that the current exhibit that is up that has to deal with death and dying throughout the Montgomery County history, that ever since they have put that up, that there has been some weird things going on. So we can't wait to explore what those weird things are, and we hope that you'll join us and come see what those weird things are. And then also on October 26th, we will have Crawfordsville's first paranormal convention. And the reason why we want to mention this to you, to all of you, as genealogists and historians, is that in the early 1900s, Crawfordsville used to host something that they called the Witches Festival. And it was a celebration during Halloween where anybody could come and celebrate all things spooky and paranormal in a time where outside Montgomery County, it was frowned upon. It was considered to be evil and bad, so people would come from other counties to celebrate it here in our county. The newspaper said hundreds of people would be all through the streets downtown, through Green Street, through Main Street, and that during the Witches Festival, class was not a thing, and race was not a thing. Everybody was equal, everybody was friends, and everyone was on the same terms during that time. And we think that that is absolutely beautiful. We would love to see that happen again here in Montgomery County, where we can all just celebrate spooky things and have a fun time together, and that's why we want to host this convention this year. It is going to be at the Crawfordsville Armory, and it is free to go. And we are going to have a lot of paranormal investigators there, paranormal crafts there. We have some podcasters who know all kinds of stories about Indiana, all across Indiana, different authors.
MUFON.
And MUFON, if you know anybody who's ever had an encounter with a UFO or an alien, MUFON is who you're supposed to contact and give that information to. So MUFON will be there if you need to talk about aliens.
Okay, Ghost Walk, times, where? I know you said every other Saturday.
Every other Saturday, so this Saturday is an off Saturday, it will be the next Saturday. We meet at 7 o'clock at the Carnegie parking lot.
Is that in the morning?
No,
In the evening.
I'm not getting up that early.
Is there a fee for that, Kristen?
Yes,
It's
$5.
$5 a person, yep.
We will be doing an extended one after this. It'll be charged more, but it'll be like 2 hours, 3 hours, where our normal one only takes about an hour.
What time is your Carnegie Museum talk?
It's I believe it's gonna be at 7 o'clock, but don't quote me. I'm still waiting on Kathy to email me back and tell me the specific time. They're really, really busy this summer with a lot of their projects, so I had to wait a little bit longer before I get the exact time.
She is on vacation. What did we find out last night at our Carnegie meeting? Through maybe the 15th. So, yeah, give her a couple of days when
Yeah.
she gets back. But yeah, I'm 99% sure we were told she's on vacation, so she'll get back with you.
So I have a question. We've been renovating a house and it was built in the 1880s, and when we were doing some renovation, we found a lot of children's shoes in the walls. Is there anything you can tell me about that?
So I think that that's very common. We actually, the house that I grew up in was on Milligan Street, and we renovated the bathroom, and we found a bunch of shoes in the walls. I've heard some various stories about that. One of the things that I have heard is that people put shoes in the walls and also cats in the walls to ward off evil omens and witches. So
Yeah, they would, there's a whole thing where they would, your shoes were no longer, wearable. They wouldn't get rid of them, they would put them in the walls because shoes were something that would scare off evil spirits and things like that. And, it allowed them to do something that would be inexpensive because, you know, shoes were expensive, to people. So this allowed them to make use of them afterwards. And it was a well-known thing. And a lot of the houses in Crawfordsville, the ones that are from the 1800s, you will still find them. If you open your walls up, you'll find shoes.
They opened up all the walls.
Yeah, we found a few things.
I think we found shoes, we found some old newspaper clippings, and then silver spoons. So
You also find hair,
Yeah.
where people would cut their long hair for any reason. They would put that in the walls. Cats, especially cat skeletons, after they would pass away. You'd find old brooms in the walls because they believed that would help wash away the dust, the witch's dust. There's all kinds of different little things like that you can find in the walls. And Crawfordsville, because it is an older area, you will find a lot of the old houses and stuff. If you open up the wall, you will find interesting things like that.
well, and I think some people just use them as time capsules for their families too, and probably just put things in the walls for future people to find. But some of it was superstitions.
Yeah, over a good 70 years, spiritualism was the main focus of Crawfordsville. It was much more important here than any regular church. And so you see a lot of that in that time frame. Or the people who lived during that time frame. It was the way they acted and what they believed They had seances every week. Some of the most renowned families in town, would bring mediums in weekly, the Elstons, the Lanes, Lou Wallace.
So what was the time span of the 70 years?
So around 1845 to about 1910. Somewhere around 1910, 1911, a lot of things died down because the people were getting arrested so frequently for being fraudulent in the field, that it put a big hurt on it. A few years before that, the Fox sisters, when the one sister came forward and explained what they were doing with the cabinet knocking and how that was falsified, so that also put a big hurt on a lot of that story.
I wanted to add, the magician Harry Houdini actually had a big contribution to the decline of spiritualism.
Yeah.
Because,
So we like to talk about, so Sir Arthur Conan Doyle was all for it, and so he would actively go out and promote it, and Harry Houdini would actively go out and try to find fraudulent people.
Yep.
So two very prominent people in the world on opposite sides of it trying to find it, but Harry Houdini especially would go out and he would purposely schedule places to put on his shows where he knew people were at so he could go prove them to be frauds.
It is interesting though, that he never went to any of the big places. He went to a lot of small towns, he went to a lot of places like that and nailed them. But he avoided, even though he was a big proponent, he did avoid some of the bigger stars of the spiritualism world. And Crawfordsville was huge on the map at the time, and he never came here. And we had one of the only spirit photography studios that's never been proven false here. And he never attempted to come and talk to them.
Abner Willis was our resident spirit photographer. His studio is where the parking lot of the courthouse is now. And they had an ad in the Indy Star for $1,000 to come and prove him to be false, and people came and they would use his equipment, the ghost showed up, they used their equipment, the ghost showed up, they took it apart piece by piece, examined everything, could not figure out how he was doing it. The only thing that needed to be consistent was that Abner had to be in the room. If Abner was in the room, the ghost showed up.
And two of those photos are in the archives here. A copy of their book.
Say, if you want.
He is fascinating though. Houdini is.
Oh, yeah.
For all the things that he was against for being such a musician.
Very cool.
And so, thank you guys so much for having us back.
Thank you.
Well, one thing that's interesting about that picture is the people in the photo, the ghosts in the photo, they knew them. And they told exactly who it was. They knew when they had died and everything.
This face up here is the face of the child that they had just lost. And they said that is their child. So, and that is not something that was common with other ghost photographers. It would just be random ghosts because of how they were doing it.